My name is Michaela Franklin. I am 22 years old, and I am the CEO of a fintech company worth $50 million, but my family still believes I am a broke student with no future. Last Christmas, they made me stay home to babysit while they went off to a fancy gala, like they always do. Pretending I am not part of their plans, my sister Simone handed me $40, told me to order pizza for her kids, and then left with her husband Chad like I was some hired help. When I told her I had a final presentation that night, she laughed in my face and warned me that if I opened my laptop, she would cut me off from the family education fund. That night I realized something. What she meant to be a punishment was actually my opportunity. The moment I stopped begging for their support was the moment everything started to change. Christmas Eve in our Buckhead mansion was never warm or cozy. Like in the movies, the air smelled like designer perfume and tension instead of cinnamon and cookies. My father Marcus stood by the fireplace adjusting his cufflinks in his expensive tuxedo, his face expressionless like always. My mother Denise was in front of the mirror securing a diamond necklace on her neck, her gown sparkling under the chandelier like a statue from some museum. Simone, the golden child of the Franklin family, was posing in the hallway mirror, fixing every strand of her hair in her emerald dress like she was on the cover of a magazine. Beside her was Chad, her smug husband, worked in finance and liked to remind everyone about it. They were all heading to the mayor's charity gala, while I was stuck in the corner wrestling Simone's 2-year-old son away from the wall where he was drawing something sticky with a half-chewed candy cane. My 3 younger cousins were running around the Christmas tree, screaming in circles. I was in my usual outfit, faded jeans and a hoodie from my community college that still had a smear of cookie dough on the sleeve. Like always, I was invisible, or at least they thought I should be. Simone turned and walked over like I was her assistant, pulling out crumpled bills from her glittery clutch purse without even looking me in the eye. She shoved them at me and said, "Here's $40, order pizza," and tried to keep them out of the living room. "Don't let them mess it up before tomorrow's brunch." I stared at the money, but I didn't take it. My hands were shaking. I said quietly, "I can't tonight, Simone." She paused, confused, finally looking at me. "What do you mean you can't? It's babysitting. It's what you do." I said, "I have my final tonight online at 8. It's my last presentation, and it decides my scholarship." Simone raised her eyebrows like I had said something ridiculous. Chad laughed loud. "And fake final for that little college you go to, Michaela. This is real life. We're going to the mayor's gala to network and talk real business. You think your class project matters more than that." I looked at my mom, hoping she would step in, but she didn't. "Michaela, don't be dramatic," she said gently, the way she always does when she's taking Simone's side. "This night is important for your father's business. You're part of this family. Help us out." My voice was shaky, but I refused to let it drop. This presentation is everything to me. If I don't do it, I lose my scholarship, and then I can't transfer to a 4-year college. I have worked all semester for this. This wasn't the first time they ignored my future like it didn't matter. A memory flashed in my mind. I was 16 in a cheap dress waiting for my winter formal date, but Simone had a mild cold, and my parents made me stay home to babysit her just in case. She spent the evening complaining about her nose while I sat outside her room, crying with a wilted corsage in my hand. I was always the sacrifice, the free babysitter, the one they used. Simone's smile vanished. She stared at me coldly. "Scholarship," she said with a laugh. "Where do you think that little degree will take you? Fine, if you care more about that than your family." She turned to our parents, her voice rising. "I warned you about this. I manage Grandpa Isaiah's education fund, and if she opens that laptop tonight, if she chooses that over us, I am shutting it down permanently." She turned back to me with fire in her eyes. "You won't get another cent for school. Not ever." I froze. Her words echoed in my ears. I looked at my father, silently pleading, but he adjusted his bow tie and said, "Simone has a point. You need to learn how to support the family." My mom smoothed her dress like nothing happened and said, "Don't ruin the evening. Just do what your sister asked." It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was clarity. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a tool. I nodded slowly. "I understand," I said, suddenly steady. My fear melted away. I untied my apron, folded it, and placed it on the counter. Then I pulled out my house key and set it on top. "I'm done," I said. I turned and walked out the front door without a coat. My mom gasped, "Michaela, what are you doing?" But I didn't turn around. I just walked down the driveway. The last thing I heard Before the door slammed shut was Simone screaming, "Go on, leave, you'll come crawling back, you little dropout." I ran into the night. The Atlanta air was sharp and cold, but I didn't care. I held my laptop bag like it was the only thing keeping me upright while they were stepping into their Bentley. I was boarding the city bus, hands shaking so hard I dropped my card twice. I rode past the bright houses and decorations into the city, trying not to cry. My stop came. I ran into the college building and made it to the classroom at exactly 7:58. The final started at 8 Ms. Franklin, just in time. My professor said the guest judges looked tired, probably sick of student pitches. I set up my laptop with trembling fingers and began, my voice cracking. "Good evening. My project is called Beacon. It's a financial tech solution to help local banks." I clicked the first slide. "Community banks are dying," I said, slowly gaining strength. "They can't compete with big banks, not because they're worse, but because they don't have the tech. They can't afford mobile apps or advanced security. The idea came from when I interned for free at my father's bank, Marcus Bank. Their systems were ancient and everything was broken. I built a full plan to fix it. I handed it to Chad, but he never read it. He just laughed and told me to get him coffee. That memory wiped out my fear. Beacon is not just an app. I told the judges it's a tool that gives banks the security and access they need to survive in today's market. With AI and mobile platforms priced for smaller communities, this can save neighborhoods." I finished, and silence filled the room, then polite clapping, then louder. My professor looked stunned as I packed my laptop. A man I didn't recognize walked up. He was older, well-dressed, and looked like he saw everything. He extended his hand and smiled. "I'm Dr. Elias Vance. He said your presentation was excellent, but I'm more impressed by your name. Are you related to Isaiah Franklin?" My voice cracked. "Yes, he was my grandfather." Dr. Vance's face lit up. "Isaiah was my best friend, and he knew Marcus. Your father was a man of appearances, not heart." I blinked, confused. My family rarely talked about Grandpa's past. He sat me down, his voice serious. "Michaela, what did they tell you about your grandfathers?" "Well," I said, "just the education fund. Simone controls it. She cut me off tonight because I refused to babysit." Dr. Vance laughed, a dry, low laugh. "Isaiah was smarter than them. He expected this. He created a secret trust just for you, a real one with me as the executor." I stared at him, shocked. "He said your grandfather didn't trust your parents to treat you fairly. So he set two conditions. One, you'd access the trust if your family ever refused to support your education, and two, you could unlock it by proving your own worth. Tonight, you did both." He led me to a quiet room, opened a folder, and showed me the documents. The trust was real, $5 million liquid, with another $3 million in investments. I couldn't breathe. I thought of Simone's smug face, of Chad's laugh. I could buy a penthouse next to hers. I could enroll in Harvard just to spite them. But I looked at my laptop bag. "The Beacon project, the idea." They mocked. "No," I said, "I don't want to show them anything. I want to build Beacon for real." Dr. Vance beamed. "That's what Isaiah hoped you'd say." He opened his case again, handed me a letter in my grandfather's handwriting, and another sealed document. Isaiah had also bought a large portion of Marcus Bank's debt through a silent holding company without anyone knowing. Dr. Vance explained, "Michaela, you are not only funded to start your company, you are now one of the biggest creditors of your own family's bank." I didn't go home that night. Dr. Vance booked me a hotel, and we spent 2 days building a plan. I left school, closed my old accounts, got a new phone number, and changed my name. I was no longer Michaela Franklin. I became Michaela Isaiah. I wrote one final note for Simone. I pulled out $40 from the trust, put it in an envelope, and wrote a message. "Here is your $40 back tip included." Then I boarded a one-way flight to Austin, the city my grandfather once said was the future of tech. I left everything behind, including them. 2 days after I left my family behind, the envelope with the $40 reached their doorstep while they were still nursing hangovers from the gala. Dr. Vance told me what happened. Simone had walked into the kitchen, still wearing her silk sleepwear, expecting to find coffee and leftover pizza. Instead, she found a plain white envelope addressed in my handwriting. She opened it slowly, her manicured nails trembling inside. She found the 4 crisp $10 bills and a note that simply read, "Here is your $40 back tip." Included. Her scream shook the walls. She called me again and again. yelling into voicemail, calling me names, telling me I was finished, ungrateful, dramatic, pathetic. Drop out. The voicemails piled up, but I never listened to a single one. My number was already disconnected. My silence only made her angrier. She must have believed I was hiding somewhere, broke, homeless, begging for a second chance, but I was already gone. In Austin, I had landed on my feet with Dr. Vance's help. I set up a new life. He became my mentor, not just the executor of the trust, but my partner in planning. He guided me through legal paperwork, helped me open a new bank account for the trust funds, and introduced me to his network of venture capitalists, developers, and business strategists. I wasn't Michaela Franklin anymore. I was Isaiah. The name on my ID, the name on my company, Beacon Fintech, was born in a quiet rented office on the east side of Austin with nothing but a laptop and a vision. I spent the next 2 years building Beacon from the ground up. I lived simply, focused entirely on the mission. Beacon was not just an app. It was a full platform designed to save small banks, to modernize them, to give them a fighting chance against massive corporate institutions that were swallowing everything. Dr. Vance believed in me from the beginning, and his belief gave me confidence. Every pitch I gave, every update I launched, every hiring decision I made was aimed at one thing: giving power back to local communities through modern banking tools. I knew that if I worked hard enough, I would not only build something real, but I would also build something that made everything they said about me a lie. I stopped thinking about my family for a while. I cut off contact, changed addresses, and stayed out of Atlanta completely. But I always had a plan. I was not running away. I was getting ready, and I knew deep down there would come a time when they would need me, and I would be ready. Beacon grew faster than I expected. Our technology worked. Small community banks were signing up across Texas and then across the South. Within 18 months, we had expanded into 10 states. Our process was simple: find small struggling banks, acquire them or partner with them, upgrade everything using Beacon, and turn them around in 6 months. The success stories piled up, and so did the press. Beacon became the quiet giant in the financial tech world, but no one knew who I was. I refused to take interviews, no photographs, no public events. I stayed behind the scenes, always listed as Isaiah on every press release. I wore custom suits, now not hoodies. I spoke in boardrooms, not classrooms. I was not the dropout anymore. I was a force, building my own legacy in silence, and watching from a distance as the family who discarded me kept sinking back. In Atlanta, Marcus Bank continued to rot slowly. Their tech was a disaster. Their systems were ancient. Their young clients had already left years ago. But now even the older customers were leaving. Rumors spread about problems behind the scenes. The name that once meant security in Buckhead was becoming a warning. Marcus called an emergency family meeting. The panic was growing fast. Dick was watching them, and they needed cash badly. My father said, "We need $5 million, or we lose everything." Simone and Chad stared at him, stunned. My mother cried quietly in the corner, twisting her pearl necklace like she used to when she was nervous. The mansion, the reputation, the parties, everything was in danger. Simone tried to fix it the only way she knew how. She picked up her phone and started scrolling, looking for a miracle that would keep them from sinking. She found it in a press article: Beacon Fintech saves struggling Midwest bank. She showed it to my father. "This is it, Dad. They save small banks. They're our last shot." They started emailing Beacon using the company website contact form. They left voicemails. They sent proposals. They wrote long, desperate messages asking for a meeting. All of them landed in the inbox of the CEO of Beacon. Me. I saw every single message, every voicemail, every pleading subject line from Marcus Franklin, my father, who once told me I had no future, from Simone, who once threatened to destroy my scholarship. They were begging for help now, and I didn't respond. I let the silence do the talking. My assistant Ryan asked if I wanted to return the calls. I said not yet. Every day, the silence crushed them more. Every ignored email, every unanswered message turned the pressure higher. Dr. Vance kept tabs through his old contacts. He told me that Marcus was no longer going into work. He was staying in his study, drinking quietly. Denise had stopped going to social events out of embarrassment. Simone was still trying to fix things the only way she knew how, by pretending they still mattered. Then came the moment they thought of: Elijah. Vance, my grandfather's old friend, a powerful man they had once dismissed, but now desperately needed Simone, tracked down his number and made the call. She tried to use her charm, her sweet voice, her carefully rehearsed panic. She told Dr. Vance that they were being bullied by bigger banks, that they needed help, that Beacon was their only hope. Dr. Vance played along perfectly. He smiled and said he knew the CEO personally and would set up a meeting if they flew to Austin next week. Simone said yes without thinking. They bought economy tickets, crammed into middle seats for the first time in their lives, flying with regular people. No champagne, no first class, no respect. Chad sweated through his silk shirt. Simone hissed at flight attendants. Marcus stared at his hands like he was trying to find the answer to everything in the wrinkles on his palms. Denise looked like she might cry, but she held it. And this was their last shot. They believed they were walking into a boardroom to charm some young tech genius. They had no idea they were walking into my boardroom. When they arrived at the Beacon headquarters, they stopped in awe. The tower was pure glass and steel, cutting into the Austin skyline, a monument to everything they were not modern, powerful, alive. They were greeted by a sharp young assistant who led them to the top floor. No one smiled, no one offered them coffee. They were just another meeting, another failing bank, begging for a miracle. The boardroom was vast and cold, walls of glass. City below, black marble table, untouched water glasses, silence. Dr. Vance entered first, calm, polite, followed by two lawyers who looked like they only spoke in six-digit invoices. Marcus stood up, shaking his hand, trying to look confident. Elias, thank you for this. We really appreciate it. Are we waiting for the CEO? Simone snapped, yes. Can we please get this started? We have a flight to catch. Dr. Vance smiled. She's on her way now. The door opened, and I walked in. I wore a black Tom Ford suit, my hair in a sharp bob, my heels clicking on the marble like a countdown to the truth. I said nothing. At first I placed my folder on the table, took the chair at the head of the table, and finally looked up. Simone gasped, her purse slipping from her lap. Denise covered her mouth. Marcus stared like he had seen a ghost. Michaela, Simone whispered, what are you doing here? Are you getting the coffee? I looked at her and let the silence stretch. Then I spoke. No, Simone, I am not here to get the coffee. I am Isaiah, CEO of Beacon Fintech. I am the one you came here to beg. I looked each of them in the eye. Hello, Dad. Hello, Mom. Hello, Simone. Silence. They couldn't speak. Not yet. Simone was the first to recover. She laughed, sharp and cruel. This is a joke, Daddy. She's playing a trick. You hired her to embarrass us, right? Dr. Vance said nothing. I ignored her. I turned on the screen behind me. A giant slide appeared. Analysis, the collapse of Marcus Bank. I clicked to the next slide. Your customer base under 40 has dropped 62%. Your acquisition costs are 400% above industry average. I clicked again. A screenshot of their outdated app filled the screen. This is your product. I said it is trash. Your bank is a ghost. Your leadership is broken. Your debt portfolio is toxic. Your board members have used your loans for personal favors. I looked at Chad and then clicked again. Now for the real problem, I said. The final slide appeared. Internal financial malpractice. Chad's face drained of color. I continued. Over the past 18 months, $1.2 million has been siphoned from Franklin Education Fund, the same fund you all once used to control me. The money was disguised as educational payments and wired offshore to accounts under the name C. Orion Enterprises. Chad's full name is Chad Orion. The money was invested in high-risk crypto and is now worth less than $5,000. Chad jumped up, shouting, it was a loan. I meant to repay it. Simone screamed, you hacked us. You have no proof. We'll sue you. I looked at her board. I didn't hack anything. I own that trust, Dr. Vance added. And we ordered a full audit when Michaela activated her private inheritance. What you did, Simone, what Chad did was not a mistake. It was theft. And it is a federal crime. My mother began sobbing. Michaela, please. We are your family. You cannot do this. I stared at her. You're not my family. Family doesn't threaten education. Family doesn't laugh at ambition. And family doesn't steal. I looked at Chad. You didn't just steal from some fund. You stole from me. I paused. Then I spoke. I will give you one chance, one offer. Beacon will buy Marcus Bank for $1. I will erase the debt. I will save the name. I will stop the seizure. But under one condition, you sign over everything. No positions, no pay. Outs no titles. Chad will sign a confession for the stolen funds in return. I won't file federal charges. Silence. Stretched. Then Simone exploded. $1. That's an insult. We'd rather lose it all than let you win. I looked at Dr. Vance. He nodded. One of the lawyers opened his case and slid a thick document across the table. This is a promissory note from your father Marcus to my grandfather Isaiah for $20 million, the loan he took to expand the bank. Isaiah paid it off in secret and took the debt as collateral. That collateral was his controlling stake in Marcus Bank, and now it belongs to me. I stared at Marcus. You defaulted on your payment to me 3 months ago. I don't need to buy your bank. I already own it. Simone stumbled. Chad collapsed into his chair. My mother cried into her hands. Marcus looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. Chad finally broke. He grabbed the pen. I'll sign, just don't charge me, Simone sobbed. But signed too. Marcus signed last, his hands trembling. I stood, took the signed papers, and said thank you. Now please get out of my boardroom. The door to the Beacon boardroom closed behind them, and the silence they left behind felt heavy like smoke after a fire. The lawyers gathered the signed documents without a word, sliding them neatly into their briefcases with the kind of calm that only comes from total victory. My family remained frozen for a moment, still seated, as if their bodies refused to accept what had just happened. My mother Denise was shaking her head in small, tight motions, as if trying to rewind time. My father Marcus sat slumped, staring down at the glass table like it had betrayed him. Simone's mouth was still hanging open, a silent echo of rage, while Chad looked completely lost, his signature on the confession form still fresh and trembling beside him. I stood and looked at them one last time, no more anger in my face, just finality. I believe we are finished here, I said, my voice sharp and cold, the kind of tone they never heard from me before. Not when I was 16, not when I was 20, not when I was begging them to let me do my final instead of babysitting. Now there was no begging, there was no need. I turned and nodded to the door. It opened immediately, and 2 large security guards stepped inside. Tall, quiet, serious, they stood like statues, but their message was clear. My father Marcus rose first, slowly, his knees shaky like he was trying to stand on a sinking ship. My mother took a moment longer. The guard gently reached a hand toward her arm, and she flinched, then nodded and stood clutching her purse like a lifeline. Simone snatched her bag from the floor, her face red with fury, her eyes stabbing daggers at me. But she said nothing. Chad didn't speak at all. He just stood and followed the others like a prisoner on his way to sentencing. The guards didn't touch them. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough. The 4 of them walked the long glass hallway back to the elevator, the same path they had walked in on, full of pride, just an hour earlier. Now they walked slower, smaller heads down. The people in the open office stared, the same young teams and developers who had paused their work to glance up when the famous Franklin family had entered. Now watched in silence as they left, phones in hand, recording, whispering. Some of them were already uploading the footage to internal channels. I didn't need to watch. I had seen enough. I walked back into my private office, closed the door, and joined Dr. Vance by the floor-to-ceiling window. Together, we watched from 50 floors above as my family exited the lobby below, blinking against the Texas sun. They looked confused, lost, like they had walked into a storm and come out the other side drenched in regret. They stood on the curb trying to find their ride-share app. The black Bentley that had dropped them off was gone. Simone shoved Chad as he fumbled with the phone. Marcus stepped away from them, pretending not to know them. Denise just stood near the planter, holding her now worthless purse. They looked like strangers to each other, not family, just 4 people who had shared a house and a lie. Dr. Vance stood quietly beside me, then spoke softly. Your grandfather would be proud of you, Michaela. He always believed you were the legacy, not the bank, not the mansion, not the reputation. But you. I didn't answer right away. I just kept watching the street as their dusty rental car pulled up, a used Toyota with peeling tint. Simone and my mother argued over who would sit where as they loaded their luggage into the trunk. It was over. They disappeared into traffic, and I took a deep breath. The weight I had carried since childhood lifted off me like chains melting. I turned from the window and nodded to Dr. Vance. It's done now. We start the real work 3 months later. I returned to Atlanta, not as a babysitter, not as the dropout, not even as Michaela Franklin. I returned as the CEO of Beacon, the woman who owned the bank that once belonged My family, I stepped into the building that had once been Marcus Bank. Everything had changed. The heavy drapes were gone, the dark wood replaced with bright open glass skylights lit the modern space where dusty chandeliers used to hang. Beacon branding was everywhere, the sleek tablet stations, the open seating, the financial advisors in Beacon jackets and branded lanyards. This was not a bank, it was a community space, it was hope. I walked into the atrium where all the employees had gathered for the first official staff address. Since the acquisition, most of them were anxious. The rumor mill had been brutal. They expected a bloodbath, firings, layoffs, purges. But I had a different plan. I stepped up to the podium and looked out at the crowd. These were the same tellers and analysts who had once ignored me in the halls when I was the founder's daughter, the same staff who had watched my parents destroy the place with arrogance and ego, and I knew they were scared. I started speaking. Good morning. I said, my voice strong and clear. I know you have questions, and I know you have been worried about what happens next. Let me answer that no one is being fired. There was an audible gasp. People looked at each other. Some mouths fell open. I continued, but everyone is being retrained. This is no longer Marcus Bank. This is Beacon Community Bank. And starting today, every one of you will be trained in our technology, our vision, and our mission. We are not just giving this building a facelift, we are giving it a new life. We are becoming the future of ethical, smart community banking. I paused and looked around. Some faces were still unsure, others hopeful. This bank was founded by Isaiah Franklin. I said, my grandfather, his dream was to help families grow, to give small businesses a chance, to offer fair loans, not flashy nonsense that disappeared in a year. That mission was lost, but now we are bringing it back, and this time we're doing it right for the first time in decades. People clapped, a few cautiously at first, then louder, genuine relief on their faces. A few smiled and nodded. I spotted Mary, an older teller who used to hand me lollipops when I was a kid. She wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled at me. The real healing had started, but my work wasn't finished. I had made a promise to myself. This wasn't just revenge, this was about rebuilding and making sure no one like me ever had to go through what I did. That's why 6 months after taking the bank, I returned to Atlanta Community College, not as a student this time, but as the keynote speaker for the annual Future Founders event. I walked through the same beige hallways where I once ran late for my final, wearing a hoodie and tears in my eyes. Now I was wearing a navy blue tailored blazer and heels. I was driven in, not dropped off at a bus stop. My former professor, Mrs. Gable, greeted me with a nervous smile. Ms. Isaiah, we are honored to have you. I smiled gently. Please call me Michaela, I said, and thank you for having me. I stepped onto the stage in same auditorium where I had once presented. Beacon with shaking hands. This time I held no slides, no fear, just truth. The room full of students went quiet as I began 2 years ago. I stood right here and gave a presentation that changed my life. I was late, I was cold, and I was almost homeless. My family had thrown me out for choosing my future over babysitting. And what they didn't know was that the project I presented that night became a company that now owns the bank they once ruled. I paused to let that settle. The students looked stunned. But I wasn't here to gloat, I was here to give back. Today I am announcing the launch of the Isaiah Franklin Innovation Fund. I said, a seed fund of $5 million named after my grandfather, a man who believed in quiet power. This fund will support students with dreams just like mine, people who have no family backing, no safety net, and who refuse to give up. We will pay full tuition, housing, and provide startup funding for real viable business ideas. I am not just handing out checks, I am investing in the next generation. I called a name, Jasmine Rogers. Please come up. A girl in the back gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked just like I did once. Exhausted, hopeful, wearing a baggy sweatshirt, she clutched a beat-up notebook to her chest and slowly made her way to the stage. I had read her application. Personally, she wanted to build a logistics app for local delivery services, but her family had kicked her out for going to school instead of working full-time. I held out a check and said, Beacon Fintech and the Isaiah Franklin Fund are investing $250,000 in your company and covering your full education. Jasmine stared at the check, then at me, then she collapsed in my arms, sobbing. The room stood in thunderous Applause. That was the moment I knew the real legacy had begun. This was not just about money or revenge. This was about building a future out of ashes, a future where the underestimated rise, where silence becomes strength, and where no one gets to decide your worth but you. It was Christmas Eve again, 1 full year after I had walked out of my family's Buckhead mansion into the freezing night, with nothing but my laptop and my final project clutched to my chest. And now I was standing in the heart of downtown Atlanta, not as their dropout disgrace, but as the owner of everything they lost. My penthouse apartment overlooked the entire city, floor to ceiling windows glowing with soft golden lights, the rooms filled with laughter, jazz music, and the warm scent of catered dishes. No screaming children, no fake smiles, no tension in the air, only peace and celebration. This was not their kind of holiday gathering, it was mine. And it was real. My team from Beacon was here, my developers, my advisors, my mentors. Even Jasmine, the student I had funded, stood in the corner, surrounded by young engineers, excitedly showing them the latest version of her app. People laughed, toasted, shared stories, and I watched them from across the room, knowing I had built this from nothing, knowing this was the life I had chosen, not the one they tried to trap me in. I had just raised my champagne glass for a toast when the building intercom buzzed. It was odd. Everyone I had invited was already here. I walked over to the panel and pressed the screen, expecting a delivery or a confused guest. What I saw made me freeze. Standing in the lobby, lit by harsh modern lights, were Marcus and Denise Franklin, my parents. They looked different, smaller, somehow like their sharp edges had been sanded down by something. They were not in designer gowns or polished tuxedos. My father wore an old coat too big for his shoulders, his once pristine hair now grayer than I remembered. My mother clutched a plastic container, blue and scratched like the ones you find in the back of kitchen drawers. She looked like she had aged a decade. I stared at the screen and felt a wave of emotions I could not name, all of them rising at once. The last time I had seen them, I was kicking them out of my boardroom after buying their bank for $1, after exposing their crimes and forcing them to sign away everything. Now they stood at my door holding what looked like homemade cookies. They didn't look proud. They didn't look angry. They looked like two tired people standing in front of a door they never expected to knock on again. Dr. Vance noticed my expression and walked over. "Who is it, Michaela?" I pointed at the screen. He stared, then his mouth tightened. "You don't have to do this. We can ask security to send them away. You owe them nothing." I kept looking at their faces, the same ones that had once laughed at me, had called me overdramatic, had dismissed my dreams like dust under their heels. They were the ones who told me I would come crawling back, and now here they were, small, defeated, silent. I hesitated, then I said, "No, let them up, let them see what I have become. The ride to the penthouse takes 60 seconds. I imagined how that elevator must have felt for them, a quiet capsule of shame rising floor by floor through the building I owned, bringing them closer to the life they had tried to crush. When the doors finally opened, they stepped into my home and just stopped. They stared at everything, the polished concrete floors, the open 2-story glass, the artwork, the decorations, the warm buzz of real celebration. For a moment neither of them spoke. Marcus held his old hat in both hands, twisting the brim. Denise kept her eyes low, as if she did not know where to look. I stayed silent, letting them see it, letting them feel it. Then finally my father spoke softly. We didn't mean to interrupt, Michaela. We know you're busy. We wanted to stop by." My mother stepped forward, slowly lifting the plastic container. With both hands I made cookies. She whispered, "Oatmeal raisin. You used to like them." Her voice cracked on the last word. I stared at them. The room behind me continued to buzz with life. None of guests noticed the ghosts standing in my doorway. I took a breath and stepped aside just far enough to let them in. They walked carefully, as if scared they might break something or be asked to leave before they could say what they came to say. I led them into a smaller lounge space off the main room, closed the glass door, and waited. I did not sit, neither did they. We stood in a triangle of memory and tension. My father tried first. We wanted to say Merry Christmas. That's all. We're not here for money or anything. We just wanted to see how you were doing." I raised my eyebrow and said, "You saw how I was doing last year when you were signing over everything you once owned." His mouth tightened, but he nodded. "I know, and I deserve that. You were right about all of it. The bank, Simone, Chad, all of it. I was blind, Michaela. and I was proud and stupid. I thought if we controlled everything we could protect the family, but really we were just protecting ourselves and hurting you. My mother swallowed hard tears in her eyes. I kept thinking about you every day since that night you walked out, she said. And when we saw the article about the Isaiah Franklin Fund and Jasmine and your new headquarters and what you were building, we realized what we had lost, not the bank, not the money, but you. I crossed my arms and said, you made your choices. You picked Simone, you picked Chad, you picked a mansion and a gala over me. She nodded silently and said, I know, and I would take it all back if I could, but I know I can't. I know there is nothing we can say or do to make it right. We just wanted you to know that we see you now. We see what we threw away. I looked at the cookies in her hands. They were wrapped in foil, not even perfectly baked. Some were cracked, some too flat, others a little burnt. They looked nothing like the catered perfection she used to serve on silver trays, and somehow that made them more honest. I let the silence hang between us. Then I took the container slowly, my fingers brushing hers, and I said, thank you. I don't know what to do with you yet, but thank you for coming. Merry Christmas, she whispered. I watched them leave, not with hatred, not with satisfaction, but with something heavier, something older. Forgiveness is not always a thunderclap. Sometimes it is just letting someone walk away in peace. 2 months later, the final piece of my work fell into place. Chad was sentenced in a quiet courtroom. No press, no headlines, no fanfare, just justice. His confession was airtight. He pled guilty to embezzling over $1.2 million from the family fund. The judge gave him 5 years probation and 2,000 hours of community service. No prison, but his real punishment came from the SEC. They barred him from working in finance forever. The man who once laughed at my presentation now could not hold a job in any investment firm in the country. He was done. Simone filed for divorce 3 months later. Her life unraveled with shocking speed. The mansion was gone. Repossessed, the sports cars gone, the designer bags. Sold her name, which once opened doors, now shut them tight. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Atlanta, the same part of town she used to mock for being too poor, too ordinary. One afternoon, while walking through Lenox Square, the same mall where she once bought her dresses and held her little social court, I saw her. She was behind a perfume counter at Neiman Marcus in the standard black employee uniform, standing stiff with a forced smile as a wealthy customer berated her about the wrong scent. She nodded, yes ma'am, over and over until the woman walked away. Then she looked up and our eyes met. She froze for a split second, then looked away quickly, pretending she had not seen me. I did not stop. I did not speak. I just walked past, knowing that nothing I could ever say would hit harder than the silence she heard in that moment. The silence of her old life collapsing around her. Marcus and Denise now lived in a modest condo north of the city. No more catered galas, no more golf club meetings. Their world was smaller, quieter, their circle reduced to each other, and the shadows of what used to be. Sometimes I visited, not often, just enough to remind them I was real, that I had not disappeared, that the daughter they once underestimated was still standing taller than ever. They no longer asked for anything, no more handouts, no more explanations, just small, awkward questions about my day, my schedule, my plans, and sometimes my garden. Marcus had started growing tomatoes on their small balcony and asked me once if I had tips for keeping them from splitting. I told him to water deeply and less often. He nodded and wrote it down on a scrap of paper. That moment meant more than any apology, because it was quiet, honest, and finally free of pride. The family who had once thrown me away, who had bet everything on appearances, who forced me to choose between my future and their convenience, now lived in the shadows of what I had built, and I walked in the light, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. The truth always rises, and mine had become impossible to ignore. After everything settled, after the headlines faded, after Simone lost her throne and Chad disappeared from boardrooms, and after Marcus and Denise vanished from the social columns, something unexpected began to happen, not loudly, not publicly, but in the quietest corners of life. It started with Jasmine. She had been the first person I ever mentored, the first student I supported through my fund, the first young woman who reminded me of myself before all the betrayals, before the family politics, before the locked doors of Christmas and the echo of children crying. She had built something brilliant. startup that taught young girls to code using interactive stories and games. I remembered the first time she pitched it, her hands shaking, her voice firm, her eyes burning with purpose. We had worked on it in my office late nights, long weekends. And finally she launched the first version. It took off faster than either of us expected. Within 6 months, she had 10,000 users and was getting noticed by major venture capitalists and education companies. When she was invited to speak at the National Women in Tech Conference in San Francisco, she asked me to introduce her. I flew out 2 days early, not just to support her, but to walk through the city I once dreamed of working in. I stood outside the building where I had once interviewed for an internship and been rejected. The woman who ran the program told me at the time, "You are very intelligent, Michaela, but I don't think you will fit our culture." Now that company was gone, absorbed by a tech giant, and the floor where I stood forgotten like a chapter in an outdated book. Jasmine stood on stage in front of a crowd of over 1,000 people, her voice clear, her passion unshaken. And when she said, "My mentor, Michaela Franklin, believed in me when I barely believed in myself," I felt something inside me heal. The applause was thunderous and real, and not a single person in that room knew or cared that I had once spent Christmas Eve scraping food off a high chair while my family sipped champagne. 2 weeks after the conference, my phone buzzed during a board meeting. It was a call from a private number. I ignored it, then another, then a text. "Michaela, it's Aunt Janice. Please, I need to talk to you." I stared at the screen for a long minute, then excused myself and stepped into the hallway. Janice was my mother's older sister, the only one in that entire family who had ever once told me I deserved more than babysitting duties and polite silence. She had moved to North Carolina years ago after a falling out with Marcus, and rarely spoke to anyone in the family. Her voice was thin and tired when I answered, "Michaela, baby, I am so sorry to call you like this, but your cousin Thomas, he's in trouble. He was arrested last night. They're saying he hacked into a state server for a dare, and I don't know what to do." I asked, "What state?" "North Carolina." She said, "He's only 17, Michaela. He's a good boy, just stupid. He thought it was a game, but they're charging him like an adult." I felt that familiar ache behind my ribs, the same ache I used to carry when I was younger and needed someone to care. And no one came. I took a breath and said, "Send me everything you have. I will see what I can do." I spent the next 4 days on calls with lawyers, cybercrime experts, and juvenile advocates. I pulled strings, I called in favors, and eventually I helped get the charges dropped to a misdemeanor and sealed the record so it wouldn't follow him. Thomas wrote me a letter afterward, not an email, a real letter in shaky penmanship, saying thank you, and I never knew you were this kind of person. My mom always said you were too angry, but now I think maybe you were just tired of being ignored." That letter sat on my desk for months, not because I needed it, but because it reminded me that sometimes being the outcast means you become the light for others. Outcasts. As winter crept in again, I found myself walking through the aisles of a quiet bookstore on Peachtree Street, not looking for anything, just breathing in the silence, the calm, when I heard a voice behind me say, "Michaela." I turned, and there she was, Nia, my youngest cousin, now 18, tall, beautiful, wearing a college hoodie and holding a book about robotics. She looked nervous and proud all at once. She said, "I saw your interview on the Women in Leadership podcast, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how everyone treated you growing up. I didn't understand then, but I do now, and I hope you keep doing what you're doing." I hugged her tight and whispered, "You will never be invisible, Nia, you hear me, never." A few weeks later, my nonprofit expanded. We started offering mentorship programs for girls aging out of foster care. We gave them laptops, internet access, training, and connections, and I watched them bloom one by one into women who no longer apologized for taking up space. And through it all, every Christmas, I received a card, not flashy, not expensive, just plain white, with my name handwritten on the envelope. It always said the same thing: "Merry Christmas, Michaela. We hope you're well. Love, Marcus and Denise." They never asked to visit again. They never demanded forgiveness. They simply sent those cards year after year like clockwork. And every year I kept them, not out of sentiment, but because sometimes peace looks like quiet persistence. During one particularly rainy December Afternoon, I was sitting in my office reviewing the upcoming quarter when my assistant knocked and said, "Michaela, there's a young woman here, says she knew you a long time ago, says her name is Ava." I felt the name like a stone in my chest. Ava was Simone's daughter, the one I used to watch, the one who once dumped flour all over the kitchen floor, the one who screamed if I didn't give her the red cup, not the blue one. She walked into my office, now dressed in simple jeans, a sweater, her hair pulled back, her eyes soft and older than her years. She said, "Hi, Auntie Michaela." I didn't know what to say. She continued, "I'm sorry to just show up like this, but I got a scholarship to Clark and I start in January, and I wanted to thank you. I know my mom was awful. I know my dad made everything worse, but I never forgot that you took care of me when I was little. I still remember how you used to hum when you washed dishes and how you let me fall asleep on the couch when everyone else was busy." I looked at her for a long time, then finally stood and walked around the desk. I opened my arms and said, "Welcome to the next chapter, Ava." And she collapsed into me, crying not for what was lost, but for what might still be possible, because in the end the revenge was never about shouting. It was never about destroying. It was about rebuilding. It was about becoming the kind of woman who could hold her head high, not because she won, but because she refused to let anyone else define her story, not Marcus, not Denise, not Simone or Chad or anyone who once turned their back on her. It was about light, not fire, about legacy, not memory. And most of all, it was about choosing every day to walk forward, even when the world once tried to lock you in a kitchen and call it gratitude. The winter air was crisp and silent as I walked home that evening after Ava left my office, my coat wrapped tight around me, not from the cold, but from the feeling of years melting off my shoulders. I passed the same bakery that used to deliver cupcakes to Simone's parties, the same one she never paid for on time, the same one whose owner used to whisper to me when I picked up trays for her, "Tell your sister, I trust you, not her." Now the shop had new owners, and the window was decorated with paper stars and warm yellow lights like something from a dream. I paused for a moment, then continued on, unsure why the sight made my chest feel so strange. The apartment was warm when I walked in, filled with the scent of cinnamon and soft jazz playing from the speakers, a small luxury I had gifted myself in the last year. I had finally made peace with enjoying things alone without guilt or explanation. There was no one to criticize how I decorated or question why I had no holiday guests, no one to tell me I was selfish for taking time off instead of spending it in a noisy living room full of sugar and tantrums. My phone buzzed, and for a moment I expected the usual Christmas emergency, a missing diaper bag, a forgotten gift, a meltdown over mashed potatoes, but it was Jasmine again, this time with a picture of her and her little sister baking cookies. Her message read, "You made me believe in different kinds of holidays. I hope yours is peaceful and filled with tea and joy." I smiled, then turned off my phone completely. For the first time in years, Christmas passed quietly. I spent the morning reading the poetry of women who wrote about rage and recovery. I drank spiced tea from a mug that said, "I am not sorry." And I was not sorry for choosing myself. For the first time, I was not sorry for refusing to explain my absence. I was not sorry for letting go of a family that only remembered me when they needed free labor or someone to take the fall. I was not sorry for the silence that followed, because in that silence I found space to breathe, to grow, to dream again. By noon, I had pulled out an old photo album, not the digital kind, but the thick leather-bound one I had kept hidden for years. Inside were pictures of me before everything, smiling with my mother on a beach, my arms wrapped around a sandcastle taller than me, holding Simone's hand at a birthday party before she started looking at me like competition, sitting beside Marcus and Denise at a school play, all of us wearing paper crowns from the party favors. I stared at those pictures, wondering when the shift happened, when the line was drawn, and I was pushed outside of it. Maybe it had always been there, maybe I was just the only one who refused to pretend it did not exist. As I flipped through the pages, I found a letter taped between two photos. It was from my grandmother, written the year before she passed. I had forgotten all about it. Her handwriting, neat and sharp, said, "Michaela, I know our family is not perfect, and I know you see things others pretend not to see. You are strong, but please do not let their blindness steal your softness. You were born with a light they cannot touch. Protect it." I sat there staring at her words, tears blurring my vision, not from sadness, but from recognition. My grandmother had seen me. She had known even then what I would face, and she had warned me not to let it harden me forever. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the mantel beside a candle that burned gently by evening. I had pulled out a recipe book and decided to cook not because anyone expected it, but because I wanted to. I made sweet potato stew and baked cornbread and played my favorite gospel records as I moved around the kitchen. This time, no one interrupted me, no one screamed from the living room, no one spilled juice or demanded I stop to wipe something or fix something or break up a fight. I danced between stove and the table like I was reclaiming something I did not even know I had lost. When I finally sat down to eat, I whispered to myself, "Merry Christmas, Michaela." And I meant it. After dinner, I wrapped up leftovers and packed them in small containers, and the next morning I walked down to the shelter, where I had started volunteering a few months earlier, not because I needed hours or recognition, but because I remembered what it felt like to be overlooked. I handed the food to the volunteer coordinator, a kind woman named Miss Lorna, who always greeted me with a hug. She said, "You did not have to do this on Christmas," and I said I did not have to do it. I wanted to. We stood there for a moment, the city quiet around us, snow beginning to fall in soft whispers, and I felt something inside me shift, not a big transformation, not the kind you write songs about, but something steady, something rooted. I walked home slowly, watching as the snow covered the sidewalks and the trees, turning everything white, and knew the rest of the year moved with rhythm and grace. My mentorship program grew. We got grants, we partnered with local universities, we opened a satellite center in Raleigh, and I hired Ava part-time to help with outreach. She was brilliant and patient and slowly finding her voice. One day, while filing some papers, she turned to me and asked, "Auntie Michaela, do you ever miss them?" I did not have to ask who she meant. I stared at the window, then said, "Sometimes, but not in the way they think I miss you." The idea of what we could have been, not what we were, and I think that is what finally set me free. Ava nodded, like she understood not just the words, but the weight behind them. By the time the next Christmas approached, I had already booked a flight to Costa Rica, not to escape, but to expand. I wanted to see places where the air smelled like salt and possibility, and I wanted to spend Christmas in the sun reading books and walking barefoot along the shore. I sent no messages to my family. I made no calls. I received the same white card with the same handwriting, the same hollow love Marcus and Denise always sent, and I placed it in a box with the others, not out of pain but out of habit, because some things do not need burning, some things just need to be filed away quietly. The flight was smooth. The resort small and beautiful, filled with travelers like me, people looking for rest, not noise, people who had stopped performing joy and started living it. On Christmas morning, I walked along the beach at sunrise, the sky painted in orange and gold, and I felt more whole than I ever had. I thought about Jasmine and Nia and Ava, and all the women I had mentored, all the girls I had taught to say no to, speak up, to walk away if needed, and I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who watched everyone else unwrap gifts while she held a crying toddler, the one who was told, "Be grateful, be useful, be quiet," and I whispered to her, "I am sorry it took so long, but I see you now, and I promise you this, from here on out we live for us and only us." I woke up the next day with the sun peeking through the sheer curtains of my little ocean view room, the sound of waves rolling in just beyond the balcony. The air was warm and calm, filled with the scent of salt and soft birdsong, and I lay there for a while, just letting myself exist without rushing, without anyone needing me, without any noise but my breath and the ocean in the distance. I could not remember the last time I had started a morning without responsibility or chaos, and it almost felt strange to let peace take up so much space inside me. I made a cup of coffee from the machine near the mini fridge and took it out onto the balcony, watching as early morning joggers moved slowly down the sand, couples holding hands, children chasing waves. But this time I was not bitter or aching or jealous. I was simply here in this moment, whole, and still. I spent most of the day reading a new novel by one of my favorite authors, someone who always wrote about complicated women who chose themselves in the end, stories that mirrored the one I had finally started living. I went down to the beach in the afternoon, wearing a white dress that flowed around me like freedom, and I walked along the shoreline, until my feet were soaked and the hem of my dress was wet with salt water. Then I sat on a rock letting the sun kiss my face, and I remembered the winters back home, the heavy coats, the gray skies, the sound of screaming kids, and someone always calling my name, not out of love, but out of need always. Needed had always been what they wanted from me, what they took, and never what they gave. But out here in this place, under this sun, no one needed anything from me, and I had never felt lighter. Later that evening, I went to the small restaurant by the resort lit with candles and soft string lights, and I ordered a meal for one, a glass of wine and a slice of key lime pie, and I did not check my phone, not even once. I did not worry about messages or missed calls or what my family might be doing or saying. I knew they were celebrating Christmas in their usual loud, extravagant way, and for the first time I truly did not care. I had not called them, and they had not called me, and that silence was not a wound, it was a wall I had built with intention and strength. The waiter complimented my dress, and I smiled, and said thank you without brushing it off or down, playing it something I had done my entire life. As if shrinking myself was polite, as if I owed the world my smallness. I did not anymore. I went back to my room and opened my journal, the one I had brought but had not yet written in, and I began to write, not about pain or memory, but about hope, about the life I wanted to build now, about the things I wanted to try, the classes I wanted to take, the art I wanted to create, the cities I wanted to visit. And I wrote a letter to myself, one that began with "You are allowed to be joyful without explanation," and it ended with "Keep going." I fell asleep that night with a sense of something new blooming inside me, something bold and unstoppable. When I returned home a few days later, the apartment felt different, not because anything had changed, but because I walked in and smiled at the cozy chaos of my space, the books on the table, the plant I had nearly killed now, somehow thriving, the art on the walls. That made no sense but brought me joy. I unpacked slowly, carefully, as if each item I removed from my suitcase was a piece of the woman I had become. At the bottom of the bag was a small shell I had picked up on my walk along the beach. I placed it on the windowsill and whispered a promise I would go back, not to escape but to celebrate. I opened my email and found a message from Simone, short and cold. It said, "Hope you had a good holiday, kids missed you." I stared at it for a long moment, then hit delete without replying, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I owed her nothing, not anymore, not after everything I had done and endured, without thanks or kindness, not after years of being the convenient sister, the unpaid nanny, the backup plan. I had finally stepped out of that role. And I was not stepping back in. Marcus and Denise sent their usual late card, generic words and stiff signatures. But there was no call, no attempt at connection, not even a fake one, and that too felt like confirmation that I had made the right choice. It was not absence that hurt, it was the realization that my presence had only ever been valuable when it served them. My life moved forward without them. I went back to work more focused than ever. The girls I mentored bloomed in ways that made my heart ache with pride. Ava was thriving, taking more responsibility, growing into her confidence. And one afternoon she came into my office with a flyer for a storytelling event at a local theater and said, "You should do this. Tell your story, people need to hear it." I laughed at first, unsure what story I would even tell, but that night as I sat in my quiet apartment, the idea would not leave me. Maybe it was time to speak, maybe it was time to take back the narrative that had been twisted and dismissed for so long. I signed up for the event, and over the next few weeks I wrote and rewrote a monologue about the girl who always stayed, the girl who said yes when she wanted to scream no, the girl who disappeared into everyone else's needs until she forgot her own. I stood on that stage in a simple black dress under one spotlight and told the truth with no shame and no bitterness, just clarity and power. And when I finished, the room was silent for a moment, then filled with applause, and I cried, not because I was sad, but because I had finally been heard on my terms. My voice, my story. The weeks that followed were filled with unexpected messages, strangers from the audience, women who saw themselves in my words, old friends who had drifted away and now reached out to say, "I never knew. I am so sorry. You are incredible." I did not respond to all of them, but I read every word and let them settle into the places that used feel invisible. The next holiday season approached, and this time I booked another trip, not to Costa Rica, but to Morocco, a place I had always dreamed of and never dared to go because it felt too far, too expensive, too bold. But I was done shrinking my dreams to fit other people's comfort. I sent Ava a postcard with a photo of the market square and a note that said, "Tell the girls to dream bigger than their fears." And she sent back a selfie of all of them holding the card with grins on their faces. And I knew I had become more than what my family let me be. I had become someone worth looking up to. Not because I suffered, but because I chose joy, I chose boundaries, I chose life. And as the plane took off and the city below faded into clouds, I whispered again to the girl I used to be, "We did it." The cold air hit me as soon as I stepped out of the airport and pulled my coat tighter around me, but nothing could take away the warmth I had carried back from Morocco. My skin still held the kiss of the sun, and my soul still felt full from the sights and sounds and spices and stories I had soaked in while walking the narrow streets of the old cities. I had brought back little treasures for my apartment and for the girls at work, hand-woven bracelets and tiny jars of saffron. And when I handed them out, the smiles I received reminded me that connection built on choice, not obligation, was the kind of love I wanted more of. I did not mention the silence from my family. I did not need to. I had made peace with the distance, and I wore it like armor. Light and protective Ava told me that the mentorship program was expanding, that our stories had reached new ears and inspired new support, and she looked at me like I had done something magical. But the truth was I had only told the truth, which for so long had felt like the most forbidden act of all the year, passed with a rhythm I created for myself, weekends spent exploring my city, weekday evenings filled with writing and art, and moments made me feel alive, not useful, not needed, just alive. I started a blog where I wrote about boundaries, about healing, about choosing yourself, and slowly, quietly, it gained a following. People commented with their own stories, with tears and hope and gratitude, and I began to see that what I had survived was not just for me, it was a map for others too. Around September, I received a message from Simone, not through email or text, but a handwritten letter that arrived in an envelope with my name in her familiar, hurried handwriting. I stared at it for an hour before opening it, not sure if I wanted to hear her voice on paper, not sure if I wanted to be pulled back into her world, even for a second. But I opened it because part of healing is knowing you can read the past without living in it again. The letter was long, full of memories and questions and soft regret. She wrote about how her marriage was falling apart, how the kids were older now and asking questions she did not know how to answer. She said she missed me. She said Christmas had not felt the same without my cookies or my stories or my quiet patience. She said she was sorry for taking me for granted, sorry for never asking if I was okay, sorry for assuming I would always be there. And at the end she wrote, "I do not expect you to forgive me, but I hope you are happy, truly happy." I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer, not to forget it, but to remind myself that even those who hurt you can feel the loss of you. That same week, Marcus called out of the blue. His number lit up my phone, and I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won, and I answered. His voice was softer than I remembered, unsure and polite. He asked how I was, and I told him honestly that I was better than I had ever been. He said he had seen one of my blog posts shared by a friend and realized it was me. He said it made him think about all the times he and Denise had brushed me off, had used me, had let me carry more than I should have. He did not apologize exactly, but there was something in his tone that sounded like understanding, and that was more than I ever thought I would get from him. We talked for 10 minutes about neutral things, the weather, our jobs, nothing heavy. But when he hung up, he said, "I am glad you are doing okay," and I believed him. The holidays came around again, and this time I stayed home, not because I was excluded, but because I chose it. I decorated my apartment with fairy lights and candles and hosted a dinner for a few close friends, people who had become my chosen family, who laughed at my jokes and brought desserts and toasted to the end of the year with real love in their eyes. We played games and danced to old songs, and no one asked me to clean up alone. No one left their children in my lap and disappeared into another room. No one treated me like less. I spent Christmas morning wrapped in a blanket, drinking cocoa by the window, watching the snow fall, and I felt something I never had during the holidays before. Peace, real True peace. I did not check social media. I did not wonder what my siblings were doing, or if their tree was bigger, or if their children were dressed in matching pajamas. I let them be where they were, and I let myself be where I was, and that was the most powerful gift I had ever given myself. New Year's came and I wrote down 3 goals, not resolutions, but promises to myself. I would keep choosing joy, I would keep saying no without guilt, and I would keep telling my story no matter who was uncomfortable. About a week later, I received another letter, this time from Denise. It was shorter than Simone's, more formal, but it said, "I read your story. I remember some of it differently, but I respect your truth. I hope you continue to find what makes you happy." I had to read it twice to believe it came from her, and while I knew it did not mean we would suddenly become close, I appreciated that she had taken the time to acknowledge what I had lived. I placed her letter next to Simone's and thought, maybe this was what healing really looked like. Not perfect reunions, not dramatic apologies, just quiet shifts in the atmosphere that let you breathe easier. I continued to write, to teach, to speak, and every time someone said thank you for putting this into words, I remembered all the nights I cried alone, thinking no one would ever understand, and I smiled because I had become my own understanding. I had become the person I needed when I was younger, and that mattered more than anything. My life no longer revolved around the holidays or expectations or guilt. My calendar was filled with art exhibits and weekend trips and volunteer days with young girls who reminded me of myself, full of questions and hunger for something more. I taught them how to say no, how to listen to the voice inside that whispered before it screams, how to believe that their value is not tied to how much they give or how quiet they are. And one afternoon, after a particularly emotional workshop, one of the girls hugged me tight and said, "I want to be like you," and I held her and whispered, "Be even better, be free." And as she walked away, I knew that I had not just escaped a life of being used, I had created a legacy of empowerment. It had taken years and silence and screaming and finally walking away, but I had rewritten the script, and every day I lived it with intention. Every day I chose myself again and again and again. The first snowfall of the year came early, and I watched from my apartment window as the white flakes painted the streets and rooftops in silence. It reminded me of the many times I had walked children to the park in this same weather, bundled up their jackets, zipped their mittens pulled on, while their parents stayed warm indoors, drinking, laughing, forgetting I even existed. It had been over 2 years since I had last spent a Christmas with them, and the silence between us had grown longer, colder, but it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like peace this year. My holiday season began with an invitation from my mentor Ava. She was hosting a winter retreat for women who had walked similar roads, who had given too much and lost themselves along the way. It was in Vermont, a quiet lodge surrounded by pine trees with a fireplace that stayed lit the entire week. I packed my bags with excitement, not hesitation, because I knew no one there would expect me to cook, clean, or babysit anyone but myself. The retreat was everything I needed and more. Each morning started with journaling by the fire. Each evening ended with deep conversations under the stars. And in between, we did the work of healing. Breathing, stretching, letting go. I met a woman named Kala who told me her sister had done the same thing, made her the permanent babysitter, made her feel invisible, until one day she just left, disappeared from all family gatherings, and started over. She told me she never looked back, and I understood her completely. We were not running away, we were walking towards something better, freer. During one of the group sessions, I shared my story from the beginning, the way my siblings would drop their kids at my door, the way my parents would say I was selfish if I dared to complain, the way I missed so many Christmases, birthdays, weekends, all because no one else stepped up. When I finished speaking, no one told me I was bitter or dramatic. They nodded, some cried, and I felt the invisible weight I had carried for so long begin to lift. After the retreat, I came home changed, lighter, and determined. I opened email inbox I had been avoiding for months and saw a message from Simone. It was short this time. She wrote, "I know you have every right not to speak to me, but the kids ask about you. Sometimes they remember your stories, your cookies, your warmth, and I wanted you to know that no matter what happened, before they miss you. I read it twice and sat with it for days. It did not make me angry. It made me reflect, because the truth was I missed them too, not the chaos, not the disrespect, not the being taken for granted, but the small hands that hugged me tightly, the laughter that echoed when we watched cartoons together, the way they lit up when I made them cocoa with marshmallows. But missing them did not mean I had to go back, so instead of replying with guilt, I responded with clarity. I wrote, I care about the kids, but I cannot return to a space where I was only valued for what I could do for others. If they want to write, I would love that, but I need to protect the peace I worked so hard to build. I hit send and felt nothing but certainty, and that was new. The days rolled into weeks, and one morning as I checked the mailbox, there was a card addressed to me in a child's handwriting. It was from Maya, Simone's daughter. She had drawn a snowman and inside wrote, I miss you, Auntie. Thank you for always reading me stories. I hope you are happy. I smiled and cried at the same time, because that was love, real love, not one laced with conditions or silence or shame. I wrote her back a short note telling her I missed her too and was proud of how big she must be getting. I included a bookmark with a quote about courage and mailed it off, hoping it would remind her that love could be kind and strong and distant when needed. Work kept me busy in a good way. Our mentorship program had doubled, and I was now leading workshops on boundaries, emotional labor, and rebuilding identity. I was asked to speak at a local college about the importance of choosing yourself, and I stood on that stage in front of 200 people and told my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor, as someone who had unlearned patterns that were never hers to begin with. The applause was loud, but what mattered more was the line of students afterward, thanking me for making them feel seen. That night I wrote in my journal, I did not waste my pain, I turned it into light. December arrived again with twinkling lights in shop windows and couples holding hands and families posing for cards, and for the first time I did not feel like an outsider looking in. I felt like someone who had carved her own path, not traditional, not perfect, but honest and full of peace. Simone emailed me again, this time sharing that she was going through a divorce and had started therapy. She said reading my blog made her realize how long she had lived without checking in on herself, how often she had passed on patterns she never questioned. She thanked me for being brave and for not shrinking to make others comfortable, and while I did not know if we would ever be close again, I appreciated the effort, the awareness. It was enough. I began planning a solo trip for New Year's, this time to Iceland, to see the northern lights and bathe in hot springs and stand under a sky so big it made everything small. I booked the tickets, smiled at confirmation, and packed my bags without looking over my shoulder. On Christmas Eve, I lit candles, made myself a dinner from scratch, and watched my favorite movies in silence, not lonely, just alone, in the most comforting way. Around midnight, my phone buzzed, a photo of Maya holding the bookmark I had sent and smiling, her front tooth missing, her eyes full of joy, and Simone had captioned it, thank you for staying kind, even when we were not. I looked at the screen for a long time and whispered to the quiet room, I am proud of me, and I meant it, every word. New Year's Day arrived with a quiet hush in the air, and I welcomed it with open arms as I stood in Iceland, staring up at the northern lights dancing across the sky. The cold air kissed my cheeks, but I did not mind. I felt alive, whole, and for the first time in many years I started the year without any bitterness or regret, only a calm sense of peace. My journey here had not been easy, but it was mine. I had chosen it step by step, year after year, saying no to what drained me and yes to what gave me breath. I remembered all the times I had sat in a noisy house full of children, wiping spills, calming tantrums while laughter floated in from the other room. I had felt small, forgotten, used. Now I stood under a sky that made everything feel both infinite and intimate, and I felt seen, not by others but by myself, and that was more than enough. When I returned home, my apartment felt like a warm hug. My plants had survived. My friend had checked on them while I was away, and a stack of mail waited for me on the counter. I sorted through bills, flyers, and then found a small envelope with glittery handwriting. It was from Lily, my cousin's daughter. She had drawn a Christmas tree, and inside wrote, I hope you had a fun holiday. I missed you this year. I hope we see you soon. I smiled, touched by her note, and realized something important. I had not stopped loving the children. I had just stopped allowing their parents to use me. I could love them and still protect myself. I wrote Lily a thank you note, added a little story about a reindeer who got lost but found her way home guided by her own light. It felt symbolic and healing. As weeks passed, my blog gained traction, and more women began reaching out, sharing their stories of emotional labor, of being the default helper, the babysitter, the forgotten one. I read each message with care, responded with kindness, and sometimes cried at how similar our stories were. Different faces, same pain, same silence, broken only when one of us found the courage to speak up. I was invited to speak at a women's conference in March, and when I stood before that audience, I told the truth, not dressed in pretty language, just raw, honest experience. I said families can hurt you even when they think they are loving you. I said sometimes walking away is not cruelty, it is clarity. I said choosing yourself is not betrayal, it is survival. And when I finished, the applause felt like thunder, not just for me, but for every woman who had carried more than her share and still showed up. The day after the conference, Simone called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. She sounded tired, her voice softer than I remembered, and she said, "I know I was wrong. I do not expect you to fix anything or come back. I just want to say I am sorry, not the kind of sorry that asks for something, just the kind that knows it is late." I let the silence stretch, then said, "Thank you. That matters." She said, "The kids still talk about you. Maya wants to be a writer now, says you inspired her." That made me smile, and I replied, "Tell her to keep writing. Her voice matters." Simone added, "I am learning how to be better for her, for myself. I just wanted you to know." And then she hung up. No pressure, no guilt, just a moment of truth. And I appreciated it more than she knew. Spring came with blossoms and longer days, and I found myself spending weekends in the community center helping young girls write their stories. Some of them carried pain I recognized too well, and I made it my mission to remind them they were not alone. One afternoon I sat with a girl named Nia who wrote a poem about being invisible, and when I asked her what inspired it, she said, "Sometimes I feel like I am only seen when someone needs something." I nodded, my heart aching, and told her I used to feel the same, but that feeling does not define you. Your light does, and it will shine when you let it. She hugged me, and I knew that moment would stay with me forever. By the time summer rolled around, I had been invited to contribute to an anthology about reclaiming your voice, and I submitted a chapter titled "The Year I Chose Me." It was honest, raw, and unapologetic, and when it was published, I held the book in my hands and cried, not because I was sad, but because I had turned my pain into purpose. I received messages from readers across the country saying they saw themselves in my words, saying they felt less alone, saying thank you, and each note was a thread that stitched my heart a little tighter together. One evening, while watching the sunset from my balcony, I received a text from Ava, my mentor. She wrote, "Proud of you, always remember you are not what they did to you, you are what you became despite it." I stared at the screen and felt warmth spread through my chest. She had been right all along. Healing is not loud. It is steady, sometimes invisible, but always moving. When fall came, I decided to host a gathering, not a family one, but a chosen family one. I invited friends, mentors, women I had met through my work, and we shared food, laughter, stories under fairy lights in my small living room. We toasted to growth, boundaries to joy, and I felt surrounded not by obligation, but by genuine connection. After everyone left, I sat with my journal and wrote, "I may have lost a version of my family, but I gained something deeper, a version of myself I never knew existed, someone strong, clear, and soft." All at once, in October, I received an unexpected call. It was my brother Alex, his voice unsure. He said, "I heard about your book, Mom. Read it," and cried. She said she never realized how alone you must have felt. I paused, then said, "I wrote it for me, not for guilt." He replied, "I know, and I respect that. I just wanted to say I am sorry too. We were wrong, and I hope someday we can all sit at the table again. Not the old way, the new way." I said maybe one day, and meant it, because forgiveness is not about forgetting. It is about choosing peace over resentment. Winter crept in slowly, and one afternoon I found a small package at my door. Inside was a handmade ornament from Meyer. It said "Rider of Light" and had a tiny quill and stars painted around it. I hung it on my tree and whispered thank you. My Christmas that year was quiet, soft, and perfect. I baked cookies, played jazz, lit candles, and wrapped a few gifts for the girls at Center, I was no longer the woman waiting for an apology to feel free. I was already free. I had built a life rooted in self-respect and love that did not demand I shrink to fit someone else's comfort. The final gift I gave myself that year was grace. Grace for the years I lost, grace for the silence I once accepted, grace for the little girl in me who always tried to be enough for people who never looked close enough to see her. And as the year drew to a close, I stood in front of my window, looked up at the night sky, and whispered, I made it, and I will never go back. The early days of the new year came and went in a quiet rhythm, and I embraced the peace like a long-awaited friend. Each morning I woke up without the weight of expectation pulling at my shoulders, and each night I slept without rehearsing the list of ways I had failed to meet someone else's demand. I spent more time writing not just for my blog, but for myself, poems, short stories, even pages of memories I had once buried too deep to touch, now spilled freely onto paper like ink. Finally freed from a clogged pen, I cooked meals with music playing in the background, sometimes dancing between the counter and the stove just because I could. I wore soft clothes and let my hair stay while I lit candles that smelled like vanilla and cedar, and I read books until I fell asleep with them resting on my chest. I did not go back to old habits, not even once. I refused to answer every text that came late at night with "Can you do me a favor?" or "I need you just this one time." I let those messages sit unread because I had nothing left to give to people who only called when they needed something from me. It was not coldness, it was self-protection, and it felt like breathing clean air after years of smoke. In early February, I received an email from a woman named Teresa. She said she had found my blog through a friend and wanted to thank me for saying the things no one else dared to say. She told me about her own story, how she had raised her siblings while her parents traveled every holiday, and how even now in her 40s, she was still seen as the helper, never the one who needed help. Her words touched me deeply, and I replied with warmth, letting her know she was not alone. We started exchanging letters, real ones, handwritten with ink, and folded into envelopes, and it felt like a lifeline across miles. Our stories different yet strangely the same, a mirror held between us reflecting back strength and scars. I began to understand that my pain was not a private shame, but a shared experience, one that echoed in the hearts of many. By March, I had gathered dozens of stories from women like me, and with their permission, I decided to compile them into a book, a collection of voices rising together in truth and resilience. I called it Letters from the Invisible Ones, and I poured my heart into editing, shaping, and honoring every single word. I cried many times while working on it, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of connection I felt with each story. I could see us all like stars in a constellation, separate, but part of something larger, something real and unbreakable. One afternoon, as I walked through a local bookstore looking for inspiration, I found a little display that said, "Books that change your life," and I paused, wondering if one day mine might sit there, not for fame or praise, but because someone needed it, the way I once needed someone to say, "I see you and you matter." In April, I was invited to join a panel on emotional labor and family roles at a local university. It felt surreal sitting beside professors and authors as I spoke about babysitting Christmas after Christmas, about how I had been groomed to believe that love meant sacrifice and silence, and about how walking away had been the bravest thing I had ever done. When the event ended, a young woman approached me, her eyes full of tears. She said, "I did not know it had a name until you said it, emotional labor. I thought it was just being a good daughter." I hugged her tightly and whispered, "Being good should not cost your soul." I received a message from Simone that week. She said Maya wanted to write her own story and asked if I would rate it. I agreed, and a few days later, a letter arrived written in purple ink on lined paper. Maya had titled it "The Christmas I Realized Auntie Was Magic," and she described how she used to think I disappeared because I was too busy, and how now she understood I had been carrying more than anyone saw. She ended it by saying, "I want to grow up to be a woman who chooses joy like you." I cried then, full body tears, because somehow through all the pain I had still managed to be someone's light. I wrote her back and said, "Your story is your power. Never let anyone dim it in mid." The book was finally done. I held the proof copy in my hands and ran my fingers over the cover. It was simple white with gold letters, but inside it held multitudes, laughter, sorrow, truth, survival, and the fierce beauty of voices no longer silenced. I sent copies to each woman who had contributed, and we Agreed to meet on a video call to celebrate. It was one of the most healing nights of my life. We laughed, we cried, we raised glasses of tea and wine and soda to each other, and I felt a bond that went beyond blood or geography. We were a new kind of family, forged not in obligation, but in shared truth. Summer arrived gently, and I decided to take another solo trip, this time to Scotland. I walked along cliffs, tasted rain on my tongue, and sat in ancient libraries breathing in the scent of old books and history. I wrote every day, filling journals with thoughts, poems, and letters to my younger self. I forgave her for all the years she stayed quiet. I promised her she would never have to beg for love again. One evening, as I watched the sun set over the highlands, I whispered aloud, "I am not the woman they broke, I am the woman I rebuilt." And the wind seemed to carry those words into the hills, wrapping them in peace. When I returned home, the world felt new. I hosted a small reading for the book at a local cafe, and people showed up, not just friends, but strangers who had read my work online, who had seen themselves in my story. One woman said, "Your words gave me the courage to say no to my sister. The first time in 15 years." Another said, "I finally realized I do not have to set myself on fire to keep others warm." I left that night feeling lighter than I had in a long time. As fall approached, I began planning something special, a writing retreat for women who needed space to heal and create. I partnered with a friend who owned a small lodge in the mountains, and we organized workshops, meals, walks by the lake, and long quiet mornings with tea and paper. The retreat filled quickly, and when the women arrived, I saw a piece of myself in each of them, their tired eyes, their hopeful hearts, their trembling hands holding pens they had not touched in years. By the end of the week, we were no longer strangers. We were witnesses to each other's becoming. We promised to keep writing, to keep healing, to never again shrink ourselves for someone else's comfort. I knew then that everything I had endured had not been in vain. I had taken ashes and built something sacred, something lasting. In October, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, I received a call from my mother. I almost did not answer, but something in me said, "Try." She sounded different, softer. She said, "I read your book, every word. It hurt, but I needed to see it. I did not know I had let so much fall on you. I thought you were strong enough to handle it." All I said, "I was, but that does not mean I should have had to." She paused, then said, "I am sorry, and I do not expect anything in return. I just wanted you to know I hear you now, and I believe you." I said, "Thank you. That means more than you know." We did not talk long, but it was enough, a start, not of reunion, but of recognition. And that was something I had longed for more than anything, not to be pulled back into old patterns, but to be seen as I was now, not the helper, not the babysitter, not the afterthought, but a whole person with boundaries and dreams and a life I had fought to build and protect. As November rolled in with its gray skies and cold mornings, I could feel the familiar pull of the holiday season approaching. Stores started putting up Christmas decorations, and songs I once loved began playing on every radio station. And yet this year everything felt different. Instead of the rising dread that usually crept into my bones, I felt a quiet calm. I was not going to be pulled back into the chaos of serving others during a time that was supposed to bring joy. I was not going to repeat the same pattern of giving while being forgotten. I had already made my plans, and I stuck to them. Without flinching, I booked a small lakeside cabin in a quiet forest town where no one knew my name and no one needed anything from me. I packed my journals, a few good books, some wool sweaters, and the softest blanket I owned, and I left my phone on silent. As I drove out of the city, the air got clearer, the sky wider, and my heart lighter. By the time I reached the cabin, it felt like I had stepped into another world, one where I existed for myself alone. The cabin was small but perfect, with a stone fireplace, wooden floors, and large windows that looked out onto the lake. I spent the first night wrapped in that blanket, sipping hot chocolate while the fire crackled beside me, and for the first time in years I watched the snowfall without thinking about anyone else. I woke up late the next morning and cooked a lazy breakfast: eggs, toast, tea, nothing fancy, but everything tasted better when there was no Rush, no noise, just peace. I sat by the window with my journal and began writing, not about the past, not about pain, but about possibility. I wrote letters to my future self filled with dreams and promises and reminders of what I had survived and what I deserved to feel. I wrote poems that made no sense to anyone but me, and I laughed out loud at the silliness of them. And it felt good to laugh just for the sake of it. On the third day, I decided to go for a walk in the woods, bundled in my coat with a scarf around my neck and gloves on my hands. I wandered down a narrow trail, crunching leaves beneath my boots and watching squirrels dart between branches. Everything smelled like pine and earth and winter, and I breathed it in like medicine, the kind that heals wounds no one can see. I found a fallen tree and sat for a while, letting my thoughts drift. I thought about the Christmases that had broken me, the years I had spent watching other people laugh while I wiped noses, changed diapers, and listened to their stories like I was just a babysitter, not family, not a guest, not someone who deserved a seat at the table. I thought about the countless times I had swallowed my frustration because speaking up meant being called selfish or ungrateful, and I let all those memories rise like smoke in my chest. And then I let them go. I whispered to the wind, I am not angry anymore, but I am done, and the wind replied with a gentle hush through the trees. When I returned to the cabin, I found a letter in my email inbox. It was from Meyer again. She had written another piece, this time titled "The Year I Stopped Asking Where She Went," and it was filled with reflections on what it means to understand boundaries and respect choices. She talked about how watching me step away had helped her realize that love can still exist even when distance is present. She ended it with a line that struck me deep. She wrote, "I used to think Christmas was only about being together now. I know it is also about letting people be free." I saved that letter and read it every morning for the rest of the trip. On Christmas Eve, I lit a small candle and placed it on the windowsill, watching its flame dance against the snow outside. I sat in silence, thinking of nothing and everything all at once. I thought of how far I had come, how I used to dread this time of year, and now I had reclaimed it as something sacred, something mine. I did not feel lonely, I felt full. I made myself a dinner of roasted vegetables and warm bread and apple cider, and I ate slowly with gratitude, not for what I had been through, but for the strength it had given me. And when the clock struck midnight, I stood outside in the snow, looked up at the stars, and whispered, "Merry Christmas," to the version of me who used to cry in silence in other people's homes, the version of me who had once believed she did not deserve more than scraps. I told her she was safe now she was seen, and she would never again be forgotten. On Christmas morning, I made tea and wrapped myself in that same soft blanket and opened the only gift under the tiny tree. I had brought a small notebook with a leather cover that I had gifted myself. Inside, I had written a single line, "You get to choose now." And I did. I chose peace. I chose rest. I chose to be the author of my own joy. Later that week, I returned to the city, not to fall back into old habits, but to begin something new. I reached out to a local nonprofit that supported women leaving emotionally abusive family dynamics and offered to host a free writing workshop for them. They welcomed the idea warmly, and by early January, I found myself sitting in a community room filled with brave women sharing their stories and scribbling their truths onto paper. Some cried, some laughed, some just sat quietly, but all of them were beginning the same journey I had started not so long ago, the journey of reclaiming voice and choice. I told them what I had learned, that healing is not always loud. Sometimes it is sitting alone in a cabin by a lake and deciding to stay instead of go. Sometimes it is saying no without guilt or apology. Sometimes it is recognizing that love given freely does not ask you to disappear. When the workshop ended, one woman hugged me and whispered, "I thought I was crazy, but you made me feel sane again." And I smiled because I knew exactly what she meant. In the weeks that followed, my book continued to reach more readers, and I began receiving invitations to speak on podcasts and attend panels. People wanted to hear how someone like me, someone who had once been treated as a background character in her own life, had found the strength to rewrite the story. I accepted some invitations and declined others, learning to balance exposure with rest, knowing that my healing was still the priority, not the performance. By late February, I had planned a second retreat, this time with more space and more activities, art, music, hiking, and lots of writing, and it filled up even faster than the first. The women who came brought with them not just notebooks but open hearts, and we spent 5 days building something beautiful, a space where no one had to explain why they were tired or why they needed to cry or why they had chosen to walk away from family that refused to change. We just knew, and we honored it together, and in that knowing we found a power that could not be taken, only shared. By early spring, I had received an email from a woman whose name I recognized immediately. It was Simone. She wrote to say that she had been reading my work in secret, following my journey from a distance, and that she wanted to say thank you. She said, "I do not expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I see it now. I see what we did to you. And I am sorry." I stared at that message for a long time, not sure how to feel, not sure if I wanted to respond at all in the end. I wrote back a short note that said, "I hope you continue to grow, and that Meyer always knows you are listening now." That was all I had to give, and it was enough, not for her maybe, but for me. I had nothing left to prove, no anger left to hold, only the quiet strength of someone who had rebuilt her world from the inside out. As the season changed once more, I stood by my window looking out at blooming trees and soft winds, and I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I was free, and no matter what came next, that would always be enough. As the months passed, I continued to build a life that felt like it finally belonged to me, a life where I was not always the one expected to sacrifice, where I was not background noise in someone else's celebration, but the main character in my own story. I kept writing, kept teaching, kept showing up for women who had also carried invisible burdens for too long, and every time I saw one of them take a deep breath and say, "I matter," I felt that same healing echo through me. I no longer tried to explain my absence to people who never cared to understand it. I stopped justifying why I had said no to another Christmas gathering where my worth was measured by how much I could give without complaint. I stopped attending family events that left me feeling smaller than when I arrived. Instead, I created new traditions, ones that centered joy and softness and space. I hosted brunches with friends who had become family. We would cook together, laugh until our sides hurt, play board games by candlelight, and talk about everything from dreams to disappointments without judgment. During one of these gatherings, Maya showed up with a gift for me. It was a framed photo from a Christmas morning years ago, where I was sitting on the floor surrounded by toys, holding her baby, while everyone else sat at the table eating and laughing. I stared at the photo for a long time, feeling both the sting of recognition and the shock of how far I had come. She said, "I found it when going through old albums, and it hit me. This was your whole holiday every year, and I never saw it until now." I hugged her, and for the first time I believed her when she said she was sorry, because I could feel she meant it not as a way to erase what happened, but as a way to witness it finally as something real, something that had shaped me in ways no one had ever cared to notice. I placed the photo on my desk next to a note that read, "You are not invisible," and it reminded me daily of why I kept telling my story, not out of bitterness, but because silence never protected me the way truth had. Over time, some of my other family members reached out. Some sent short texts saying things like, "Hope you are well," or "Miss seeing you at the holidays." And while part of me appreciated the effort, I did not respond out of guilt or nostalgia. I responded only when I felt like it, when it felt safe and respectful. I no longer operated from a place of obligation. I had learned that being related does not mean being entitled to someone's time or peace. I had earned both, and I was no longer giving them away for free. One afternoon in late spring, I received a message from a local radio host who had read my book and wanted to interview me for a special series on reclaiming the holidays. I agreed, and a week later I found myself sitting in a cozy studio with headphones on and a mic in front of me. The host asked thoughtful questions, not just about what I had gone through, but about how I had rebuilt, how I had found courage, how I had turned pain into purpose. I told her about the cabin, the writing workshops, the moments of doubt, and the moments of light. I spoke about the first Christmas I spent alone, and how it felt like both mourning and rebirth all at once. I said the hardest part was not walking away, the hardest part was believing I was allowed to, and that once I believed that everything else became possible after the interview aired. I received dozens of messages from listeners who saw themselves in my story. Some were daughters, some were sons, some were grandparents. All of them had once been expected to hold up traditions that broke them, and none of them had known they were allowed to say no. I replied to every message with care because I remembered what it felt like to wonder if you were the only one who struggled in silence. I remembered how lonely it felt to step away and not know if it made you strong or selfish, and I wanted them to know it was always strength that guides us back to ourselves, not weakness. In early summer, I organized a day retreat in the park for people who could not attend the longer cabin sessions. We met under a large oak tree with blankets and notepads and thermoses of tea and coffee. Some brought their kids, some came alone, and we wrote, we cried, we laughed, we let the wind carry our words into the trees, and watched as strangers became companions in the art of letting go. One woman said, I thought I had to wait for them to change before I could breathe, but now I know I can choose breath anytime. And we all nodded because that was the truth we had learned, not through sermons or advice, but through living it ourselves. By midsummer, I began drafting my second book. This one focused not just on surviving family expectations, but on creating a new legacy, a new rhythm, a new way to hold holidays that honored both our joy and our limits. I wrote chapters about choosing solitude without shame, about celebrating with chosen family, about rituals that restored rather than drained. I wrote about forgiveness not as a requirement, but as a release, about how some bridges do not need to be burned, just never crossed again. I included letters from readers who shared their own stories and wove them into a larger tapestry of resilience. The book was harder to write than the first because it required imagining beyond the pain. It required hope, but I wrote it slowly and honestly, and it began to take shape like a garden tended in quiet hours. When autumn arrived again, I felt the familiar shift, the pull of memory and muscle and history. But this time I did not brace myself. I leaned into the season with softness. I decorated my home not with the colors others expected, but with ones that brought me calm, silver and blue and soft white. I lit candles not to create ambience, but to remind myself of light. I hosted a letter writing night where friends came over and wrote letters to their past selves, to the people they had once been, at holiday dinners, at family events, at moments of silence. In surrender, we read them aloud, and it was one of the most sacred nights I had ever known. By December, I had heard from Simone again. She wrote to say that Maya had shared parts of her writing with the family, and that it had started conversations, real ones, not defensive ones, and that while she knew she could not undo the past, she was trying to learn how to show up differently. I did not respond this time, not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed to hold her hand through her growth. It was hers to do, just like mine had been. I spent Christmas Eve curled up with my dog under a thick blanket, reading poetry and sipping cider. The snow fell gently outside, and I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was mine, my choice, my peace, my holiday. As midnight approached, I stood by the window again, just like I had the year before, and whispered thank you to the version of me who had said no for the first time, who had packed her bags and driven into the woods not knowing if she was running away or running toward, and who had ended up finding herself in the quiet. I whispered, you did it, and I meant it. In the weeks that followed Christmas, I began to notice how light I felt, not just emotionally, but physically, as if I had been carrying something heavy for years without realizing it. And now that I had finally set it down, I could breathe easier, move freer, exist in my own rhythm. I had always believed that healing would come in big dramatic waves, some life-changing breakthrough or explosive confrontation. But what I discovered instead was that healing came in small choices, in daily decisions, to protect my peace, to walk away from chaos, to choose rest over resentment. I no longer needed people to validate my pain in order to believe it had happened, and I no longer needed their apology in order to free myself from it. There were days when I still woke up with a slight ache, when I remembered how many years I gave to people who only saw me as useful, not lovable, but even those moments softened with time, like old bruises that no longer hurt when touched, just reminded you that you survived. I began exploring new hobbies, things I never had time for, because I was always on call, always expected to be available during the holidays. Now I painted not to become an artist, but because the feel of Color on canvas soothed something inside me. I hiked through snowy trails alone with my thoughts, letting the silence speak to parts of me that had been drowned out by the noise of other people's needs. I went to bookstores and cafes and wrote letters to myself, letters that said things like, "I am proud of you for choosing yourself, or you deserved more, and it is not your fault that they never saw it." I attended a winter solstice gathering in town, where strangers shared stories around a bonfire about what they were releasing, and what they were calling in for the new year. When it was my turn, I said, "I am releasing the role of the family babysitter, the one who is expected to sacrifice her joy so others can have theirs, and I am calling in a life where my happiness is not conditional, not borrowed, not negotiable." The group clapped, and someone handed me a small stone with a word etched on it, freedom. I kept it in my coat pocket like a talisman. Every time I felt doubt creeping in, I would touch it and remind myself of the promise I made. The cabin I had rented had become more than a place to hide, it had become a space to return to myself. So I extended my stay, turning weeks into months, until winter gave way to early spring, and the world around me began to bloom again. Just as I got an email from a publisher who had seen an essay I submitted to an online journal, the one about that final Christmas, and how I packed my bags and left. They wanted to publish a collection of essays about reclaiming joy, especially around the holidays, and asked if I would be interested in expanding my piece into something longer. I said yes without hesitation, not because I wanted revenge or recognition, but because I had learned that sharing my truth gave others permission to examine their own, and that felt like purpose. Maya came to visit in late March, bringing warm pastries and a tentative smile. We sat by the fireplace and talked about everything except the past, until she finally said, "I miss you, not just during the holidays, but always." I told her I missed the version of us that used to laugh at midnight over melted cookies and stolen moments of real connection. She nodded and said, "I want to rebuild if you are open to it, not because anyone is asking me to, but because I realized I lost something real when I lost you." It was the most honest thing she had said to me in years, and while I did not jump up and embrace her, I did not shut her out either. I told her rebuilding would take time, and it would have to be on new terms that respected my boundaries and my worth. She agreed, and I saw tears in her eyes, not manipulative ones, but the kind that came from someone finally seeing the wreckage they helped create and wanting to clear it piece by piece. Slowly, I returned to the idea of family, not as an obligation, but as a choice. I began reaching out to cousins I had grown up with who had quietly drifted away over the years. Many of them shared similar experiences, stories of being the responsible one, the helper, the peacekeeper, and how those roles had isolated them. We decided to create a new kind of gathering, a reunion of sorts, not tied to any holiday, but just a celebration of who we were outside of our families' expectations. We met at a lakeside lodge in early summer, bringing our own food, music, and laughter, and it was one of the most healing weekends of my life. We danced barefoot on the grass, roasted marshmallows under the stars, shared stories that had never been spoken aloud, and promised to keep showing up for each other, not just when it was convenient. When it truly mattered, it felt like reclaiming something sacred, a kind of joy that was ours and ours alone. By the time fall arrived again, I had completed the manuscript for the book, each chapter a piece of my truth, a moment I had once swallowed to keep the piece now written in ink and released. A sigh. I titled it Silent Seasons because that is what so many holidays had been for me, silent seasons of giving and enduring and disappearing. I included stories from other people, as well anonymous submissions from those who had read my essay and felt brave enough to share their own, each one a testament to the fact that I was never alone, and neither were they. The publisher loved it and set a release date for the following year, just before Christmas, which felt poetic, like closing the loop on a story that had started with pain but ended in power. As winter returned, I found myself reflecting, not with bitterness but with clarity, the girl I had been, the woman I had become, and all the versions in between who had fought silently for breath, space, and joy. I no longer dreaded December. I no longer felt anxious at the sight of festive lights or holiday invitations. I created my own traditions, now ones that made me feel seen and loved and whole. I sent out invitations for a winter gathering at the cabin, calling it the celebration of light, not tied to any religion or family history, just a moment for chosen family to come together and honor the light we carried through dark seasons. People showed up with candles, letters, songs, and we spent the night in reflection and gratitude. No gifts, just presence in the truest sense. At the end of the evening, I stood by the fire and thanked everyone for coming. I said this year is different, not because everything is perfect, but because I finally believe I deserve peace, not just in theory, but in practice, and I will never again trade that peace for a seat at someone else's table, where I am only welcome if I am useful. The group applauded, and I felt a warmth rise in my chest that had nothing to do with the fire outside. The snow began to fall gently, and I watched it from the window, remembering the woman I used to be, the one who stood in that same spot a year ago, unsure of what the next step would look like, but brave enough to take it anyway. I whispered again, thank you, this time not just to her, but to every version of me that had carried the weight until I was ready to put it down. A year had passed since the day I walked out with my suitcase and a heart full of pain, and something I never thought I had courage, and now as I looked around at my life, I saw how everything had changed, not with sudden explosions, but with quiet, steady steps that brought me back to myself. The winter air was crisp again, and the town had already begun to glow with lights and music and red ribbons, but this time I felt no dread, no tightness in my chest at the sound of carols or the sight of happy families shopping for gifts. I was not waiting for a call from Maya or my parents or anyone from old world I had left behind, because now I knew what silence meant. It meant freedom, it meant peace, it meant choosing where I spent my joy instead of letting others drain it. I had made new friends, people who did not see me as someone to rely on only when they wanted to escape their responsibilities. People who invited me to events because they liked my presence, not because they needed free child care. I had joined a book club and a hiking group, and even started hosting writing workshops in the town library, something I would never have dared to do before, when I was always second guessing my worth. Always exhausted from emotional labor, I did not even know I was performing for a family that never said thank you. One day in early December, as snow began falling again, I got a message from Claire. She had moved to another state with her husband, and had recently become a mother herself. She wrote say that she finally understood a small piece of what I had gone through all those years, the exhaustion, the pressure, the weight of being expected to give and give without complaint. She apologized not just for her silence, but for laughing along with the others when I tried to speak up. She said, I see it now, and I am sorry. I do not expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you were never wrong for saying no, and I admire you for walking away. It took me a long time to get there, but I get it now. I stared at her message for a long time, letting it settle in my bones before replying, thank you. I wish you peace and strength on your journey, and I hope you break the cycle for your own child too. It was short but sincere, and it felt like another thread being untangled, another knot loosened. The book I had written, Silent Seasons, had been published a week earlier, and was already getting attention more than I expected. People were sharing their own stories on social media, tagging the title using the hashtag, and quoting passages that mirrored their own experiences. One line kept appearing again and again: I was not born to be a shadow in someone else's holiday. And reading that made me feel like everything I endured had meaning, not because suffering is noble, but because surviving it and telling the truth is powerful. I was invited to speak at a winter book festival in the city, and when I stood on stage looking out at the crowd, I saw so many faces, some with tears, some nodding silently, some just holding the book to their chest like it carried their own voice. I read the chapter about that last Christmas, and how I had packed my bag with shaking hands, and how I walked through the snow without looking back, and when I finished the room was silent, not empty but full of understanding. And I knew then that I was not just healing myself, I was part of something bigger, a quiet revolution of people saying no more to being used, disguised as loved. The holidays came around again, and I decided to do something different. I rented a lodge in the mountains and invited only those who had shown me love without conditions, my new friends, a few distant cousins who had reached out after reading the book, and even Maya, who had spent the last year rebuilding our bond, slowly, respectfully, honestly. She had shown up not with excuses, but with consistent actions, small gestures, checking in without guilt, sending birthday cards with kind words, showing up for events. I invited her to even when no one else did. I told her she could come to the lodge celebration, not because I had forgotten, but because I had forgiven, not for her, but for me. We arrived at the lodge a few days before Christmas and decorated it with candles and soft lights and handmade ornaments that told stories. Each person brought one and hung it on the tree. Mine was a tiny paper suitcase with the word enough written inside in silver ink. As we sat by the fire sharing stories, sipping warm drinks, and watching the snow fall outside, I felt a calm I had never felt during the holidays, not once in all those years. No tension, no fake smiles, no tiptoeing around egos, just laughter, real laughter, and the gentle hum of connection. On Christmas morning, we made pancakes and danced in our pajamas and read poems aloud. Maya handed me a small box with a note that said, "For the girl who saved herself." I opened it and found a necklace with a tiny book pendant inside. When I opened the pendant, it had a quote from my own writing: "You are allowed to choose peace even if it means walking alone." I looked at her, and she said, "Thank you for choosing you because it gave me permission to do the same." I nodded, holding back tears, and for once they were not tears of pain, but of release, of knowing that I had made it through the worst season of my life and come out not bitter, but blooming. The kids who were there played quietly, building snow forts and reading picture books by the fire. None of them screamed or demanded or threw food at me. None of them were left in my lap while their parents disappeared to drink or dance. I was not the help. I was not the unpaid babysitter. I was a guest. I was loved. I was free. We ended the night with a candle lighting, each person saying one thing they were letting go of, and one thing they were embracing. When it was my turn, I said, "I am letting go of the guilt that kept me small, and I am embracing the joy of being seen, not for what I can do, but for who I am." Everyone lit their candle, and the room glowed in the most beautiful, quiet way, and I thought, this is what holidays should feel like. Not obligation, but light; not expectation, but choice; not survival, but celebration. When the weekend ended, and we all packed to leave, Maya hugged me longer than she ever had before and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on yourself." And I said, "Thank you for finally showing up for me." We parted with a promise to keep building this new chapter together, slowly, with care and honesty. When I returned home, I placed the tiny suitcase ornament on my bookshelf beside the first copy of Silent Seasons, and I smiled. I had traveled far, not in miles, but in courage, in clarity, in choosing my own peace over other people's comfort. And I knew that no matter how many more winters came, I would never again forget my worth. I would never again be the girl who disappeared into the kitchen while everyone else opened gifts and toasted joy without her. I would never again carry the weight of everyone else's fun while mine was buried under plates and tantrums and silence. I had written a new story, not just on paper, but in the way I lived, and that story was mine. Outro. This story is not just about revenge, it is about truth, pain, and rising stronger than before. If this hit your heart, then you know what to do. Like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more real stories that burn like fire. Until next time, stay sharp, stay loud, stay rebel.